From the World Economic Forum, for instance, 35 to 40% of employees in developed economies have reported working from home most or all of the time during the pandemic, which is a huge increase, obviously, from the past. And other studies are saying that more than 20% of the workforce could work remotely 3 to 5 days a week as effectively as they could in the office, which would mean that if remote work actually does continue to take hold at that level going forward, it's going to have a trickle-down effect on so many things and so many different aspects of our lives. Of course, as we talked about a year ago, when all of this started happening and people were trying to look into their crystal ball and predict some of the outcome, we were talking about productivity. Various reports have come out saying 41% of employees that responded to a survey done by McKenzie said they're more productive working from home than in the office, and that people have gained experience working remotely during the pandemic. Their confidence and their productivity have grown, and they expect to continue to work remotely. So those are some of the benefits around the productivity side of all of this. But as we all know, and many of you that are joining us today, including our brilliant panelists, who I will introduce in a moment, there's a lot of legal complexity when it comes to working remotely and working from home. Some things we can draw back on, like we remember I would call them the old days of telecommuting policies and how that's all evolved. And other things are just kind of new because we haven't really had to think through in depth legal compliance issues that could impact a large workforce that suddenly is working in a different state or a different country.
All that boiled down into this idea that Slack was going to become our new HQ. And not Slack, the physical office locations in 12 countries and yada, yada, but really the product was going to be the default to how we work together indefinitely. We used to, like most companies, make individuals or managers have to build a case for why they wanted to work from home. And we would take them through a list of criteria about that decision. And we got to the point during the pandemic where we realized, hey, our population is mostly knowledge workers. We think our product facilitates knowledge work from anywhere. We really should shift from this very dated approach. And so we called that shift a default to yes, where we shifted the burden from individual employees onto ourselves as a company and people managers to actually say, hey, if we think a particular role cannot work from home, we've got to identify pretty strong reasons as to why that is. Otherwise, the default will be yes, everyone can work from home sort of indefinitely. The difficult part is when they come to tax and legal and compliance and they say, hey, just make that work, right? Just get a policy together and figure that out in a couple of weeks, right? It'll be okay. So Susan, as you know, we reached out to your firm because I was like, look, we've got 4 to 6 weeks and we've got to get this off the ground in 12 different countries simultaneously.
As we had entire countries start working remotely and operating out of their home, we had to transition really fast from what previously had been a very much in the office culture. And while we do have global teams, we do have people who are, routinely working together around the globe. Most of the work was done in offices, except for our sales team, who historically always worked remotely or telecommuted. You talked about telecommuting policy. We had our sales team generally as the main users of those policies. And so we had to transition pretty quickly to kind of two subsets of workers, our essential workers who were in the office and our remote workers who needed to be able to work from home. And it was two very separate and different work streams. Well, Susan, you and I have been having this conversation about our global workforce and people moving around for years. It hasn't just been since the pandemic, really, although that did really force a lot of these issues to the front and center. But I work very closely with our tax team. I work very closely with our payroll team and then the global mobility team as well. Because when you're thinking about people moving around, working from home or working in the office, really, you need to think through things like, do they have a visa? Are they going to create a tax permanent establishment issue for you? Do you have the ability to payroll them? Because as we all know, governments around the world are really scrutinizing the payroll tax implications of workers in their countries. So those issues have always existed, but certainly putting a large portion of our workforce from working from home really scrutinized and heightened all of those issues.
I think one of the things that we actually did well is we created sort of a checklist of issues, and then we took that to form our Tiger team. So if the issues involve tax, then we necessarily pulled in our tax folks. Operationally, we pulled in people ops, mobility for sure had a large stakeholdership in things. And so like that's one of the things that my former self actually did right is I thought like this cannot just be a legal-led effort. There are way too many issues here. We need to kind of think about this at a broad level and then drill down on how we're going to phase out the work. I'll also say that safety and security played a huge role as well as did workplace, particularly because we still need to figure out like once we closed down the offices and we worked from home, like what role was the office going to play in the future? And I think the thing that you might have said already on the call, and I think the thing that we've discovered is that hybrid work, I do think is here to stay. People want flexibility above all. Very few people want to be tied to working from home only or working from the office only. And so figuring out with our workplace folks in real estate, like, okay, what does that mean for how we're going to bring back the office? And also, like, while people are working from home, are we meeting our duty of care and health and safety obligations? That was definitely part of the conversation. It's actually given me the ability to think about, well, what do I want out of the office when we go back? And I think it's also kind of deepened the sense of inclusion amongst the teams that I work with. I think when you know people, then you work better, you make more allowances for what's going on in someone's life. And work from home has definitely enabled me to know my team better. And so, whereas before I might go into any one of like our open office spaces or an office and meet with somebody and you know what you're meeting about, you know, the project details, you don't know their families, you don't see their kids running behind them, you don't see their cats jump up on their, laptops. I think it's just really brought some humanity back to the way that we work. And that's really more of like an inclusive way in which to work.
Yeah, that's interesting. And thinking back to March and all of the funny kind of Zoom call background stuff that happened initially. But you're right. It does enable us to get to know people on a much different level when we're all working out of our homes and maybe having a little bit more grace than you ordinarily would have for life getting in the way. We're now thinking about how to enhance your home office experience and things like making sure we have ergonomic assessments available for people who are working remotely. A lot of companies, ours included, have done allowances for office furniture, which is, something that we really would not have contemplated doing a year ago here in the United States in particular. So thinking about how do we enhance the whole experience when we're in a dispersed work environment has been really interesting. Things like care packages to people at their homes is quite different than what we were doing historically to enhance that in the office experience.
I would say that like the natural benefit is access to a wider talent pool, and that necessarily, or at least hopefully, will mean that you are drawing in talent that is more diverse than you previously were. And so while I do think access is better, access to a broader talent pool is better, there needs to be a real intent behind how are we now going to make sure that the increased numbers in our pool actually like get retained by the company long term.
I do think that increased communication amongst team has been something that we've been very intentional about at our company to try to make people feel like you might not all be in the same space together in the office, but you're still part of a team. When we were thinking about remote work a year or two ago, it was really this idea that remote workers won't be doing anything. And we're finding maybe it's the opposite, that they're doing too much, and figuring out how to create boundaries when you don't have that natural physical boundary of office versus home has been something that has been a challenge for our workforce.
Erin, you might remember that when we began kind of formalizing this default to yes policy, one of the things that we tried to do is say to employees, okay, like it's a yes to maybe it's France, but it's a yes for a year, and you're locked in for a year to give particularly our payroll and tax teams predictability on how to manage that for a growing population of folks. And that has actually been semi-successful, but I would still say that we always struggle with the exceptions. And we don't want it to become a thing where it's like, okay, if you ask on the right day or you ask the right person, then maybe you'll get an exception. Maybe you'll be able to move, from 3 countries within 3 months. So that continues to be an iterative process for us, just to try to strike the right balance between making things employee friendly, but also operationally feasible for our teams. We try to sort of automate all the processes to give employees the information that they need to make the decision, so that there are very few human touch points to facilitate that information sharing. And then we really rely on the employees and the managers to have a robust set of discussions about what this will mean for their team. And again, like I mentioned before, we default to yes. So the employee knows going in, as long as they're willing to kind of sign up for how our framework works, which is all kind of conceptualized and documented in our remote worker agreement, that they're probably going to get a yes out of that. And that happens honestly very, very quickly. I think within a matter of like maybe 1 to 2 weeks for most employees. And they're also given the ability to forward date their request. So normally we'll get requests, people want to maybe move and buy a house in whatever location. So they need to know what their comp is going to be for their mortgage lender, right? Things like that. So making sure that we have an automated process really has helped in a lot of respects.
We have transitioned that, like a lot of people, to a more remote perk environment. So we have a wellness website. We have things like maybe guided meditation that can be done online, or yoga classes that can be done online. So we've tried to transition that to thinking about it more from a wellness angle and how to keep our employees not totally burning out in this remote environment that has been a pretty challenging work environment for the last year. So that's been our focus, is transitioning it to wellness perks.
Like Erin, we have leaned into wellness during the pandemic, and we really wanted to make sure that we create a space that feels psychologically safe for our employees. That was a real big piece of feedback that we received from employees just across 2020. And so we've invested in Modern Health and different virtual means for employees to get help. And that's been, I think, a good thing across the board globally. I actually think it will be harder than we think to get employees to come back to whatever way, shape, or form we think the office is going to look like in the future. But I do think we've got huge issues to solve for caregivers and how we allow them or facilitate them being able to actually provide those services and come back to the office. And I don't think that's a nut that we can crack in one fell swoop. And then I think just like in terms of health and safety, public transportation is another big one that will not just automatically go back to being whatever we thought it was before. So I think really figuring out what carrots rather than sticks to offer to employees to have them come back predictably so that we can then develop a real estate philosophy around that is going to be something that's going to take us a while to kind of tackle.
I would say, words of advice are continue to be flexible and just try to take up these new issues as they come. Shella's right. Getting people back to what the world looked like before the pandemic started will be difficult / impossible. They say it takes something like 3 months to form a habit, and we've been doing this for a year. So unwinding will be difficult.